Hi everyone, welcome to another Access Control coaching session. My name is Cole Nebaker and I am the Training and Events Manager for PDK. In this Access Control coaching session, we are going to be covering configuration and programming, one of our most popular requests, one of the calls that our support team gets the very most calls about. So we are going to cover everything from start to finish, but we do these coaching sessions once a month. So be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any valuable content like this. So let's get started. All right, so starting from the software, we are at our customers page. So this is showing us all of our existing customers. If we are an integrator in the system, we will have a plus button right next to customers there, allowing us to add more customers, but I've already taken the liberty of creating a customer. So you can see currently if we go under System and Health, there are no cloud nodes that have been added. We're starting with a fresh system. So we're going to navigate down to Configuration where we have our add icon in the middle of the page. If we do already have a cloud node in here, it'll appear and the plus button will be in the bottom right hand corner. So starting with that plus button, we'll hit plus and add in the serial number of the cloud node. The cloud node is always going to start with a 107 serial number. If it does not start with 107, you are looking in the wrong place. But you can find this on the inside of the lid of the cloud node, or you can find it on the box. In our case, my cloud node serial number is 107399Z. And I'm going to add this as a primary cloud node. Naming is really at your discretion of what's most intuitive and descriptive for your own use. And then we do have a notes section for any notes that you may need for future reference. So be sure to populate that with anything important that you may need to reference down the road. Now, one of the most important parts of configuration is setting the time zone. The reason this is so important is because if you don't set it, then the schedules and the access rules will not conform to your time zone, which is a hot mess. So be sure to set the time zone correctly. And in our case, since we're based here in Utah, ours is USA and UTC 6 Mountain Time. But depending on where you are in the world, you may have a different time zone. Just be sure to select the correct one. Now across the top, we have various tabs. We have cards, devices, connections, discovery, and diagnostics. We're just going to go through these one by one. So starting with cards, we have our e-card section. This is where you're going to add your emergency backup cards. If everything else fails, these credentials will continue to function on your access control system. So it is very important that you populate this, followed by hitting the right button at the bottom. Under card formats, you have the option to customize an existing card format. So if we hit the advanced drop-down menu, we have the supporting input bit range. In our case, we have it from 9 to 64, which is quite a broad range, but it does cover most of the odds and ends. And then we have the facility code processing, where if we hit enforce with filter list, it will give us a list of a list section where we can list out our facility codes. And then enforce per credential is done more under the person's credentials tab. We can enforce parity, and we can also learn more about card formats following that link below. So if you do have any questions on that, be sure to hit that link. All right, we can also select from a pre-populated list of credentials. This will range from all of the most popular credential formats in the industry. Just select whichever one you have. H10302 or whatever it is, HID credentials, and it will be there. Now, under devices, we do have the option to add devices manually one by one. This isn't what I would say is the recommended method. I'd say it's the harder method of what we offer, so I am going to show you the easier way to do it, but just to make sure we cover all the bases here. When we hit plus, we're presented with door gate, I/O devices, and elevator readers. You can see that we do have two kinds of readers underneath doors or gates. And that is a primary reader and an additional reader. Now, primary readers you do have to program first, but then you can add on additional readers to that primary reader. For example, if you have a scan in and scan out at a door, you put the primary reader on the outside, the additional reader on the inside. Going back, we have sorry, I misclicked. We're going to have I/O devices, and we have two kinds. We have generic and premium. So generic are going to be your standard I/O devices. They are addressable, but you can't activate them within the software, whereas premium I/O devices are activatable within the software. Generic are non-billable and premium are billable, just like your standard doors. And then finally we have elevators. And just like doors, we have primary and additional readers. But then we also have a floor relay, and that floor relay is the relay you will program to restrict access to certain floors on a system. Okay, now going back, we are going to head on over to the Connections tab, and we are going to select the onboard controller. You can see here that it is designated as port 1. Now, not all of our cloud nodes have a built-on onboard controller. The RSVR, the rack mountable, does not have an onboard controller. So if you do have an RSVR, it will neither have the onboard controller nor the wireless coordinator component. But if you do have an onboard controller, make sure it is designated as port 1. If it is not in the system, you can add it. Just be sure to assign it to port 1. And then the coordinator likewise gets programmed in if you have an RCNEW. This only applies to RCNEWs or our old legacy cloud nodes. And those are assigned to port 0. All right, we can add in additional connections. We're going to cover these in more detail, what they look like inside the tab a bit later, but we do have coordinators, Ethernet, wireless gateways, the onboard controller, and Apereo. So if you don't have any of these in there, you can add them manually. Okay, now getting over to discovery, this is the bread and butter of the PDK software. Everything is self-discoverable with the red line of products. So we heavily emphasize using this tab. If we hit the search icon, you can see that we have had 3 devices pop up. Each of these are wired as Ethernet. If you do WiMAC, they will show just a WiMAC address with a WiMAC logo next to them. But in our case, since they are Ethernet, they populate with the MAC address and the IPv6 address. And when we hover over them, we have the Add Port button. So this is where we are going to very quickly and intuitively add our devices. When we do hit Add Port, we'll be presented with a screen very similar to what we had under the Devices tab. I'm going to program all of these as either doors or gates. So this one in particular is a red reader. So I'm going to program it with the naming scheme, which you probably wouldn't see in a real-life install, but is beneficial for our purposes. RMPB red reader, I'm going to list it as a swinging door, and since these are all single door controllers, I'm going to program all of these under port 1. This is going to be the physical port number that the device is associated with. So if you have an R4, for example, a 4-door controller, your port number could be anywhere from 1, 2, 3, or 4. If you have an A8, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. So it is the physical port number that you are programming on the device. We do have the option to open connection details after creating. I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to just hit Add. Now I'm going to go through the rest of these and program them. So add port, door gate. It's going to be a primary reader for this one as well. This one was the touch IO. So the RDR-BT, I'm going to program this one to appear as a swinging gate. And it is also a red one, so it's going to be on port 1. And then we're going to go through the last one, which is a ruggedized reader, an RDR-GRK. I'm going to put that as the naming scheme. I'm going to do it as a roll-up door for this case. And it's also a red one, so it's going to be on port 1 as well. Okay. Now, once we hit Add, we have all 3 of our devices added in here, and they do appear underneath the MAC addresses and the IPv6 addresses. And if we go back to the Devices page, all 3 of them now appear. Now, there is some additional programming needed on occasion. Sometimes this may be all you need. But I'm going to go into each of these and show you some of the ins and outs, because they are all different kinds of readers for a purpose. So you can see that we do have a board with the highlighted port number. So since I selected port 1, it shows me port 1. Since it's an R1, it's pretty intuitive, but that is the port that we will be working with, those 3 slots. You can also see if I hit the drop down on connections, I now have access to view all of the connection types that I have associated with this cloud node. So I have the onboard controller and wireless coordinator, which were always there, and then I have the 3 boards that I just added and their MAC addresses. All right, appearance is there. Since this is a touch I/O, you can see at the top there, I'm referencing back. We are going to program this as a touch I/O reader, and I'm going to hit save. Now, when I scroll back down, you'll see that I have two checkboxes. I have Weekend and OSDP. Now, the touch I/O does not support OSDP. It is a Weekend device, so I'm going to uncheck that. You could leave it checked. It doesn't really matter. And then we go down to auto open after first allow. So this is our first man in rule. This is where you program those from. So when you're setting up the device, you can choose whether you want it to be an auto open after first allow device, meaning that when somebody badges in for the day, it unlocks the door for the pre-programmed schedule to remain unlocked. Okay, then we have our authentication policy under that, which does override all of our authentication policies. We have our triggers, so we can activate and deactivate the relay to test it. We have our relay delay, which is how long after you trigger the relay it actually opens. So if you do want there to be a bit of a lag in when the relay opens, you will populate that with a number. And then the dwell time, which is how long the relay stays open. Most common doors are 3 to 5 seconds, typically. And then under inputs, we have two kinds. We have the A input, which is your DPS. So if you do have a door position sensor on this door, be sure to add an A input. And then B is REX, your request to exit. So if you do have a request to exit, be sure to program that in with one of your inputs. I'm going to forego those on this particular device. You can see we have alarms, propped alarm and forced alarms if we do have DPSs and or REXs with this device. All right, so propped alarm requires a DPS, forced alarm requires a DPS and a REX. And we'll hit save. Now, going back to the other device, the RDR-GRK, the ruggedized reader, this is a standard reader. So when we scroll down, you're going to notice that it is set as a standard reader. It is not a touch I/O, it's not a red reader. We'll leave it as standard. All right, this is also a weekend-only device, so we can uncheck OSDP. You don't have to. And then we've got disabled and enabled for the auto open after first allow, and then our authentication policy if we are going to override under groups and schedules. Got our relay, a lot of the same stuff that we covered in the last one, delay and dwell, and then our inputs. In this case, I do add a DPS input on this, which does allow us to program a propped alarm. So this is going to configure the system to say, hey, after 120 seconds of the door not being closed, sound the alarm that a door's been propped. And you can configure exactly what a door propped alarm does under system events. But that's it for this one. Our final one is going to be our red reader, and in this case an RMPB. So when we go into it, it is a red reader, shows us where on the board it gets plugged in, but we are going to hit the drop-down menu and select red reader. Since it is a red reader, it will require a reader serial number. Now the nice thing is it automatically populates in our case, you can see right there, because it is OSDP. I've wired it in OSDP. So in this case, I'm actually just going to disable the weekend altogether and show you that OSDP's the preferred option here. So under credentials, we have a few options with a red reader. We can enable and support Bluetooth credentials, and we can only accept secure credential reads, which means that we will not accept 125 kilohertz card badges on that reader. If we hit the drop-down menu under OSDP address, this is for multi-drop. So if you do choose to have multiple readers attached to a single line going back to the PDK controller, you can do so. And then there is a cog icon next to the OSDP setting, and if you click on it, it will show you whether it detects weekend or OSDP, and also allow you to configure the address 0, 1, 2, or 3 within there. Then finally, we have require secure channel. So if we would like to require that it communicate through that secure channel, we can do so by checking that box. Same things we've had previously: auto open after first allow, authentication policy, activate, deactivate the relay, and delay and dwell time for the relay, which I've set to 10 seconds in this case. Now you can see under inputs, I'm adding both a DPS and a REX, which opens up not only the propped alarm, but also the forced alarm. So we'll set it to 120 seconds again for the propped alarm, and we'll just configure the forced alarm, which doesn't require any kind of time input. And we'll go up to the top, we'll hit save. Now I'm also going to show you under the kebab menu there, we have a few additional options. We can transfer the device type of this device. So if we make a mistake and program this as a primary reader, or we add it as an additional reader down the road, we can configure it to transfer to an additional reader type. We also have audit logs. So you can pull this stuff under reports, but this is a more quickly accessible audit trail of what's happened with this device. So you can see here that I have a couple of modifications and entities added and modified. And if I select details, I can see additional details about what's happened with this device over its lifespan. All right, going back to devices, I'm going to go ahead and add another device. And this one I'm going to add as a premium I/O device, just to kind of show you. Now, I haven't used the onboard controller yet, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to call this one a lighting override. I'm going to select the light icon, and I'm going to select the onboard controller since I have not yet used it, and designate it as port 1 since it is an R1. Then you can see here that I've got all my standard stuff that I would have with a standard door controller, but since I'm not using a reader for the lighting override, I'm just going to go ahead and disable Wiegand and OSDP. Okay, so now I have 4 devices in here. If we go over to connections, you can see all of my connections that I am currently utilizing. It will show a green dot if everything is good. It will show a red dot if everything is not good. So clicking on these, for example, one of the Ethernets, you can see that it defaults to IPv6. That's what makes it self-discoverable. However, you can do an IPv4 static. You can do this by selecting IPv4 right here and defining the IP address. Make sure that the port number down below is 10,001. That is the designated port number. The controller Ethernet you can also change from auto to IPv4 static if you want to define in more detail, such as the IPv4 address, the network mask, the gateway, and the DNS. And finally, down below, what we recommend for ultimate security is connection locking. And this means that the controller cannot be picked up by another cloud node on the network, and just makes it overall harder to breach into that. All right, now if I hit the plus, I'm going to show you what each of these looks like. We've seen coordinator, which is wireless coordinator port. We've got Ethernet, so we've got the 2 kinds, the PDK, which will be the defaulted IPv6, and Lantronix, which is going to be an IPv4 static that you pre-configure using the Lantronix tool. Again, port 10,001. We've got the wireless gateway, where you populate the name, port, and IP address. And we've got the onboard and Apereo connections as well. And the Apereo is a little bit different. You populate the MAC address instead of the IP address. And then if we go over to diagnostics, this page is for wireless connections. Since I didn't use any wireless connections, this isn't showing me much. It's showing me the blue dot indicating that the coordinator is active. You can see there on the left, if we did have wireless, we would have green, yellow, red, or gray bubbles just around the wireless coordinator. Shows you the communication path since it is a mesh network, and it would show us important details about the wireless. At the top right, you can start the links test if needed, and you can view all sorts of pertinent details about your wireless system and do some diagnostics from this page. Now, going all the way back to the main page, you can see if we click on System and Health, everything is connected and synced. I am going to add software version, connection type, and battery to this so that I can see all of these details. You can see they're all running 2.1. We've got the battery on the cloud node, which is showing 100% charge. They're all Ethernet connections, and it shows the last sync date. Now, if I click on the cloud node, for example, it will show me the IPv4, IPv6, and MAC address, as well as the serial number and software version. A lot of really good information for diagnostics of the cloud node. And if we click on a controller, it shows us a little more network and power information, such as the MAC address, the IPv6 address, power status, battery status, things of that nature. Going back to creative marketing, I'm going to go into system events and create 2 system events. Now, I don't want to give too many spoilers here because we are going to do a dedicated coaching session on system and group events. But just to give you an idea of what you've done with the relays, we've got the A input. As an example, I'm going to set the schedule to always. an example of what that might look like is the trigger being on close. In other words, when the DPS is closed, do this. In our case, we're going to silence a piezo alarm. You're just going to select your devices. I'm going to select the 3 doors, hit add, and then the target devices are going to be the same as the source devices. Now, an example of a B input, a Rex input, would be on Rex close as the trigger. Give it a moment to scroll down. On Rex close, do this, and the most common is open/close. Programming a B input from the configuration page will not activate the door. You need to come into system events and program this rule, saying when a Rex is closed, open/close that door, and that gives you the option to configure the dwell time of the door. This is a step that a lot of people miss. But again, I'm going to select my source devices as those 3, and the target devices are the same as the source devices, unless you want to trigger some far-off door based on some obscure Rex input. All right, so I'm just showing if a Rex is closed, then open and close. And that brings us back to the home page where we have now configured a full-blown PDK system. All right, so that covers it for this coaching session. Let's see if we have any questions. I didn't know you could control lights with PDK. That's exciting. It is. You can really get pretty creative with your capabilities with the PDK system, because after all, it is just an input and an output board using PDK's intuitive software. All right. Doesn't look like we really had any questions. So that's great. If you do have any questions, reach out to your sales rep. You can reach out to sales@prodatakey.com if you don't know who your sales rep is, or you can reach out to your rep directly if you have their phone number or email address, and they'll be happy to help you. In addition, our support team is a very valuable resource. This training was designed to help you learn some of the things that support frequently gets questions to. But if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to our awesome support team as well. But like I said, we will have another access control coaching session next month on system and group events. So until then, we'll catch you next time.